This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hello, I'm Razia Iqbal. Thank you for downloading the BBC's World Tonight podcast from Friday, November the 1st. On the programme, after months of protests in Hong Kong, China's ruling Communist Party indicates it may change the way the territory is governed. We get the views of a leading pro-democracy activist in Hong Kong and how that battle is being mirrored in British universities. Also, Nigel Farage calls on the Conservatives to join a Leave alliance, but the Prime Minister rejects the idea, saying it could lead to Labour winning the election. And we discuss the future of the TV industry as Apple launches its own streaming service. As pro-democracy protests, which began in June, continue to dominate life in Hong Kong, there's been a signal from China's ruling Communist Party that it will intervene more in the territory's day-to-day affairs, from education to the selection of the city's top leader, its chief executive. The signs are ominous. Beijing has made it clear that it's preparing to take a tougher approach towards pro-democracy protesters, that it would strengthen ways to safeguard national security and step up efforts to make Hong Kongers more patriotic towards the mainland. The protests, which began as resistance to the imposition of a proposal to allow extradition to mainland China, those plans have been shelved. The demonstrations morphed and widened to include demands such as universal suffrage. Protests represent the biggest popular challenge to President Xi Jinping's government since he took over the leadership in late 2012. Beijing paints the demonstrators as dangerous separatists and accuses foreign powers of backing them. Today's announcement follows a closed-door 4-day meeting of the ruling Communist Party's senior leaders in Beijing. Speaking after the end of these meetings, Shen Chunyao, a senior official from the Hong Kong and Macau Basic Law Committee, said this.
We should educate Hong Kong and Macau society, especially public officials and teenagers, about the Constitution and basic law, and strengthen the national consciousness and patriotism of Hong Kong and Macau compatriots through the education of history and Chinese culture.
So how have those who've been protesting on the streets for the past few months reacted to these statements? Isaac Cheng is Vice President of the pro-democracy organisation Demosisto.
I definitely think that they are misunderstanding the Hong Kong conditions, because actually Hong Kong is not facing educational problem. It is a political problem. So please use some political ways to solve political problems, but not using some educational ways. And previously, you can see that Joshua Wong fighting against the national education, and a lot of Hong Kong people are fighting against it because we are not accepting any kind of indoctrinating and brainwashing education inside Hong Kong.
Is that what you think that this means?
Definitely, I think that it will be brainwashing and indoctrinating educations for the government or for the central government. They are really sensitive on changing the political system. So they will try to use any way to brainwash or indoctrinate the new generations to try to change their mindset, not supporting freedom or democracy again. But I definitely promised to the central government that Hong Kong people will fighting for democracy and freedom as long as we can, and we won't step back. The government, especially for the central government and Xi Jinping, they won't give you any kind of hope that you are keep on protesting, or even the movement ongoing, you will get any kind of success, or even you can achieve your goal, because the dictatorship won't let you have any kind of hope.
When you hear from the committee in Beijing that they will try to improve the process through which the chief executive is elected, do you not see that that is going some way to try and at least listen to the concerns of the protesters on the streets?
I think that they are pretending to listen to the protester, but their attitude from the beginning to now, they are not actually listening. So I think for the voices of 5 demand, not one less, is really clear, and they definitely hear that. But when they hear that, and they have a lot of calculations, and will they achieve the 5 demands, this is another story.
And the main one for you is universal adult suffrage and not having a candidate being imposed on you.
Yes, and universal suffrage, I think this is the key point of democracy, because you can see that in Hong Kong democracy system, it is really unfair, and the chief executive who are ruling Hong Kong people are actually elected by 1,000 or 2,000 people. So this is not a good system or even a representative system for the Hong Kong people.
That was Isaac Cheng, Vice President of the Hong Kong pro-democracy organisation Demosisto. We can speak now to Steve Tsang, who is Director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London. Is it clear what Beijing's intentions are? Steve Tsang, are you with us?
I think it is quite clear. And what it really means, yes, I am. Yes, I think it's very clear in terms of what the Chinese government is trying to do. They do not accept that they have made any mistake in their policy and being responsible. And they thought if they double up, move on that, and then they will resolve the problems.
We appear to be having some problems with your line, Steve Tsang. We will try and come back to you before we go on to... Well, let's go to the next item, because what's interesting about what's been happening in Hong Kong is that the battle between pro-democracy supporters there and the authorities in Beijing appears to be mirrored here in the UK too. In Birmingham, Liverpool, Sheffield and York, students from mainland China have confronted pro-Hong Kong democracy campaigners, and the confrontations have turned violent on at least one occasion. But now the universities stand accused of treating Chinese students with a light touch, indeed sometimes helping them to stop the Hong Kong democracy campaigners. The World Tonight's Paul Moss has this report.
Would you like to sign petitions to support Hong Kong's protests?
It wasn't an easy task. On a rather cold, rainy evening in the centre of Sheffield, a group of students from Hong Kong were trying to get passers-by to sign a petition.
Excuse me, would you like to support democracy in Hong Kong?
There weren't many takers. Most people just rushed past. But for the Hong Kong democracy campaigners, this experience wasn't nearly so bad as another recent occasion when they set up a stall in Sheffield. Cecilia Chong was handing out leaflets when another group of students from mainland China showed up.
They started swearing at us, and also a guy, he grabbed one of our flag and then he broken it. And then after that, there was a guy just turned around and he looked into my eyes and he threw a glass bottle. He was aiming at me.
He threw a glass bottle at you?
Yeah. Luckily, I stepped back a little bit, but it was quite a big attack because we got mobbed by more than hundreds of mainlander.
Over at York University, 3 students from Hong Kong were talking about what happened when they set up a stall with posters about the democracy campaign. This one was at the Student Union Freshers' Fair. They didn't want to give their names, but described how they too were confronted by mainland Chinese students.
The Chinese student came aggressively, saying that we insulted their country, our posters were not allowed to put on the walls.
Some of them took mugshots and pictures of us, so which is very concerning because there have been Chinese students stalking Hong Kong students, trying to expose their identity through social media.
They didn't want to communicate with us. They just wanted us to take the posters down, and they just threat us and say, oh, we're going to call the security. Then if you don't take it down, then they will ask you to take it down.
And that, the students say, is what happened. Security staff came and they had to remove their posters.
The security made us take our posters down because we shouldn't put anything up.
It's showing that the student union was backing down to the Chinese students.
We asked York University Students' Union about this, and they initially sent a statement saying that nobody had complained about events at the Freshers' Fair, and the university authorities also referred us to this statement. But later they admitted they had actually had a meeting with the Hong Kong students to discuss their complaint, the same complaint they said they hadn't received. Meanwhile, the Chinese student at Sheffield who threw a bottle was arrested and given a caution by police. Yet we understand he's been allowed to continue his studies. And all of this is a sign that British universities are too timid when it comes to dealing with mainland Chinese students, according to Professor Christopher Hughes, a China expert at the London School of Economics.
The kind of language used towards students from Hong Kong in particular, photographing students, and then the physical intimidation. If that was homophobic or racist, then whoever did that would be disciplined and I hope would be expelled from the university or at least suspended for a whole year. The fact that students can get away with this kind of behaviour because they happen to be Chinese seems to be a problem.
Why? Why do you think universities are not treating incidents in which Chinese people are guilty of, as you see it, intimidation? Why do you think they're not punishing them harshly enough?
The universities, they see China as the goose that lays the golden eggs. It's as simple as that. You only have to look at their business plans. You look at the number of Chinese students. You look at the plans for getting philanthropic donations from China, rich Chinese businesses. So all the incentives are to go easy and not upset China.
I've managed to see some examples of the online intimidation which the Hong Kong students are facing. There's one page I'm looking at where the man who attacked the Sheffield campaigners seems to be joking about it. You could roughly translate what he says as, "Oops, I threw a bottle." Another post asks people to go along to pro-Hong Kong democracy events held by Sheffield and Liverpool University students, and it suggests they take photographs of the participants. These have then been posted online. And that really does scare students. Certainly that was the case with the one student who's agreed to speak to me who actually comes from mainland China. It turned out he was a supporter of the Hong Kong democracy campaign.
I support democracy in Hong Kong. I do support the democracy movements in China. So my views are definitely not in line with my government. And there's a probability that someone from the Chinese spy agency or stuff is listening to this radio right now. If he happens to be able to recognize my voice, maybe the next time I go back to China, not many good things are going to happen to me. No.
You're seriously worried that by talking to me you're taking a risk?
Yeah, I am. Yes,
well, it's very kind of you to speak to me. Are you worried about other students seeing you?
Yes, I am. If there are Chinese students in my school, being able to recognize me on the radio show, I'll probably not be sentenced to jail or something, but honestly, I don't know what will happen to me.
We did raise the subject of China's pressure with the organisation which represents British academia, Universities UK. However, they refused to answer any specific questions about China. They would only say that pressure can come from many governments around the world and that British universities have a track record of standing their ground and resisting it. Reassurances like that aren't enough for the pro-Hong Kong democracy campaigners in Sheffield. Among them is Angus Fong, a doctor who's been in the UK for more than a decade. As far as he's concerned, China's pressure poses a profound test for British universities and the values they stand for.
We all know China is now a major global power, and it is very difficult for the university. I understand that money at the end of the day drives their research, drives their facilities, and these international students do pay a lot to be here. But for me, the university should not just be passing on academic information to students, but they should teach them how to behave as an adult in this society, and that includes upholding human rights and freedom as a human being.
That report was from Paul Moss. We can speak again to Steve Tsang, Director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Listening to the voices of the students in that report, I wonder if you're surprised that this is happening in UK universities?
I'm afraid that I am not surprised that this is happening. I think we need to look at this in two ways. One is that the Chinese government does try to influence us. That is just what they do. The second thing is in terms of how universities in the UK are dealing with that kind of pressure. I think that is the area that we should focus most on.
So you say that we have to accept that the Chinese do influence. Do you see how would you characterize the extent of that influence?
Well, we have to bear in mind that the Chinese political system remains fundamentally a Leninist political system. And the Leninist system is about control and asserting its influence wherever it can. So all Chinese students in the UK or indeed in any other countries could potentially be put under pressure by the Chinese government. And the Chinese government can actually say that if a university is not responding to them, it can withdraw all Chinese students. It's a threat that if it were made, say, by the United States, we will simply laugh it off.
And the second part of your answer was your concern about how British universities are responding to this.
Indeed. I think for universities, the most basic duty we have is to maintain academic independence and academic integrity. And also it requires us to maintain certain standards of behavior among all our students wherever they happen to hail from. I think that is the area where some universities, some of the time, are not matching up to what they need to.
Let's just get your reaction to the statements coming out of Beijing from the director of the Hong Kong and Macau Basic Law Commission. Is it clear to you what the Chinese, the intentions of Beijing are when they talk about improving the way in which the chief executive is elected and so on?
I think it is fairly clear in terms of what their intentions are. And the intentions does not include allowing the chief executive in Hong Kong to be elected in the way that the protesters in Hong Kong would like to. All that they are really intending to do is to make sure that when they select the next chief executive, they will select somebody who is politically smart rather than somebody who is politically completely inept, like the current holder, Carrie Lam.
Steve Tsang, Director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Thanks for joining us. Apologies for the difficulties with the line. Campaigning for the general election on December the 12th is already well underway. This morning, it was the turn of Nigel Farage and his Brexit party, launching their campaign by calling for a voting pact with the Conservative Party. His offer wasn't straightforward, though. He said Boris Johnson would have to scrap his Brexit deal and agree to a clean break withdrawal instead. The Prime Minister this evening rejected Mr Farage's call for the Tories and the Brexit Party to work together. He was speaking to our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
The difficulty about doing deals with any other party is that any other party, I'm afraid, simply risks, or voting for any other party, simply risks putting Jeremy Corbyn into number 10.
There are no circumstances under which you would work with Nigel Farage.
That's what you're saying. I want to be very, very clear that voting for any other party than this government, this Conservative government, this One Nation Conservative government, is basically tantamount to putting Jeremy Corbyn in.
The Prime Minister speaking a little earlier today. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Jessica Parker. Boris Johnson there pretty firmly closing down any option of a pact with the Brexit Party, but this could come back to haunt him, couldn't it?
Well, it could. It completely depends how the campaign goes. I mean, I don't think it was ever looking particularly likely that Boris Johnson was going to agree to some sort of electoral pact with the Brexit Party. But look, the Tory campaign could to some extent rely on trying to keep the Brexit Party at bay, stopping that squeeze that Boris Johnson was just talking about there that could see Labour come through the middle if Brexit Party takes votes off the Tories. And Nigel Farage making it clear today that should a pact not happen, and I think he's given Boris Johnson until mid-November to make up his mind, Mr Farage isn't going to make life particularly easy for the Conservatives. He's going to go around telling everyone how bad he thinks Boris Johnson's Brexit deal is. He's going to field a candidate in every single seat in England, Wales and Scotland. So it could prove a problem for Boris Johnson, but we should say as well, the Brexit Party leader making it pretty clear he's after Labour support as well.
And we've heard details this evening of the first head-to-head television election debate. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, well, sure enough, when you get an election season, you'll start hearing discussion of the possibility of TV debates, who should take part in them, who might host them, what kind of format should they be in? Will a chicken start stalking one of the party leaders who's refusing to take part? ITV has announced a head-to-head between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. It's going to be hosted by Julie Etchingham. They are also planning a multi-party debate as well, but as you can imagine, following this head-to-head announcement, some of the other parties aren't impressed at all. The Lib Dem MP said this shouldn't be a two-party men-only system, and the SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford said that this debate could be deeply misleading.
Just tell us a little bit more about what another thing that's happened this evening. A very long-standing member of the Tory party and former Member of Parliament, Matthew Parris, and now a columnist for the Times newspaper, has decided to leave the party. It's an article that's pretty strong.
Yeah, writing in the Times, he talks about how the party he joined 50 years ago, in which he's stuck by in good times and bad, has been taken over, he says, by an ugly cult. And he's announced he'll be voting Liberal Democrat to defeat what he describes as Tory zealotry on Europe. Now, look, I'm not sure everyone will be hugely surprised. Matthew Parris has been clearly quite unhappy about Brexit, pretty critical of Boris Johnson. But he, in his article, decries the loss of certain figures from the party, the likes of Ken Clarke, Dominic Grieve, Philip Hammond. I think for some, Matthew Parris's announcement will be a further symbol that the Conservative Party is somehow lurched to the right, abandoning the centre ground. Backers of Boris Johnson would reject that completely. He talked only today about being a one-nation Tory, but I think it is yet another example of how Brexit does have the power to break traditional loyalties apart.
Jessica Parker, our political correspondent, joining us live from Westminster. Thank you. Now, it's been a year since the NHS allowed specialist practitioners to prescribe medicinal cannabis. However, the BBC has discovered that many parents of children with severe epilepsy are continuing to travel to the Netherlands to access the psychoactive or mind-altering THC-containing oil for their children. Meanwhile, Dutch parents have resorted to growing cannabis plants in their garden because they can't afford medicinal cannabis over the counter, and insurance companies are mostly refusing to reimburse the cost. Anna Holligan has this report.
The Netherlands is synonymous with its cannabis cafe culture. Now, the thing is, it's mostly illegal to actually grow cannabis here, which means the drugs you buy in these cannabis cafes are entirely unregulated. And you have no way of knowing where or how this cannabis was cultivated. There is an exception. A state-controlled cannabis farm.
Medicinal cannabis has been available via the pharmacy for patients in the Netherlands since September 2003.
This is a government-produced video.
The supply and production of medicinal cannabis is the responsibility of the Office of Medicinal Cannabis, part of the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport.
The obstacle for Dutch patients is the price. Entering her garden through a beaded curtain, Marion Fisher tells me she needs the cannabis oil for herself and her daughter Jackie to prevent their epileptic seizures. Her doctor told her it was a fad and refused to write a prescription, so she's resorted to producing her own.
You would make the oil from the plants out here?
Yeah.
Right. Is this legal?
No, it's not. I think they consider cannabis oil as hard drugs.
When you have Jackie, who's 8 here, and you're mixing hard drugs on the table, as a parent, does that make you feel guilty?
Uncomfortable, but I always have to go back to what you feel, and you know that it's good.
You were afraid that she was going to develop the same level of epilepsy as you had.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, the first time she got a seizure, we were afraid we almost lost her. I gave her CBD oil.
The type that doesn't contain THC.
I think within a few seconds she woke up. So for me, it's the perfect medicine.
Arwin Ramcharan was the first pharmacist in the Netherlands to stock medicinal cannabis at the Dutch government's request. He thinks there's still a taboo about prescribing what some doctors consider a recreational hippie drug. To combat that, he's preparing to carry out the first official trials in this country he hopes will challenge any prejudices with scientific evidence.
If it is helping the patient, then that's a win for both sides.
Arwin supplies 12 British families with medicinal cannabis. Anthony Clary comes to the Netherlands every month to collect it for his daughter, Indy Rose.
Thank you very much.
Yes, have a nice day.
Anthony and his partner Tanine shared old videos that show Indy Rose having seizures and panic attacks to demonstrate the difference they say medicinal cannabis containing a small amount of THC has made to their daughter, who's now walking and joking with her brother.
For one Dutch family, there's been a breakthrough.
Meryl Klaassen's son, Noah, was having hundreds of seizures a month. She discovered cannabis oil that contains THC and is adamant it almost entirely stopped them. But she couldn't afford to keep on buying it. And after months of battling with the support of her neurologist, the highest Dutch medical commission ruled the insurance company must reimburse her.
Ik kan me nog heel goed herinneren hoe die was voor de olie.
You can remember what it was like before.
Ja, en daar willen we nooit meer naar terug.
You never want to go back to that?
Nee. I would like to say, start looking at the people and stop looking at the money.
Yeah. This is really all the families want, a normal life and free access to the only drug which, in their experience, can guarantee this. So the trials here in the Netherlands start in 2020, and then it will be up to the insurance companies and the people with the power to prescribe to decide whether to accept the evidence.
It is there, and doctors can get it. So knock on every door, never give up, because it's your child.
That report was from Anna Holligan. Now, home entertainment, no longer a matter of plonking yourself on a sofa and browsing through a handful of channels. The choice is dizzying. Today, pay TV has a new kid on the block. The Silicon Valley giant, Apple, makes its debut in the original content market, launching in 100 countries with a show starring Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston, her first TV series since leaving Friends. Apple is up against other giants in this field. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon and Disney will soon be weighing in. So, is Apple joining the bandwagon rather late in an already saturated market? What kind of impact is all that making on the future of television?
8 seconds to you.
Good morning. I'm bringing you some sad and upsetting news. And while I don't know the details of the allegations...
She's throwing me under the bus.
Mitch Kessler, my co-host and partner of 15 years, was fired today.
You!
We all have a role to play.
Am I listened to in this family? Am I seen for who and what I am? No.
We have all made sacrifices and suppressed who we are. It is not a choice. It is a duty.
Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. They said you were coming. They said you were the best in the parsec.
Well, what you heard there...
agree?
What you heard there was the new Apple TV show this morning, a trailer to whet your appetite for the third series of The Crown, Netflix's hugely successful series, and Disney's $100 million Star Wars live-action TV series, The Mandalorian. Let's talk to Michael Grade, Lord Grade, former ITV and BBC chairman, amongst much else in an illustrious TV career, and Dawn Shimilevsky, senior media editor at Forbes, an American business magazine. Dawn, let's start with you. Apple Television Plus launching today. Why is it any different to all those other streaming services that are available?
There are close to 200 streaming services available, so the choices are many. Apple is seeking to differentiate itself in the marketplace by producing its own original content and nothing more. Apple went out and sought some of the best names or the best known names in Hollywood. As you mentioned, Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston, who co-star in The Morning Show, which your viewers heard, and they've struck deals with Oprah Winfrey and with Steven Spielberg, all to attract content that will be distinctive. Its hope is to differentiate itself from Disney and from Netflix and from Hulu and from seemingly scores of other services that will be launching in the coming months.
Michael Grade, are you convinced that there is space for whatever it is that Apple perceives to be its original take on this, or is the market so saturated that it's kind of slightly crazy now?
It's not saturated. The public's appetite for storytelling is insatiable. And the great joy of streaming is it hands power to the viewer. You're not in the hands of the scheduler who tells you can only have an episode once a week at 9 o'clock on Friday. You've got the choice to sit and binge, and the money that's being poured into original drama production is exciting. The market will take care of it at the end. There'll be consolidation. If there are too many players, there'll be some consolidation in a few years' time.
Okay, so you seem to think that there's a huge appetite for this, but I wonder what it means then for the standards, if you like. Do you think that it is beginning to make an impact on things just not being that good, or is the competition so fierce that what we're seeing is actually brilliant quality?
The ambitions are getting greater and greater. The cost per hour is going up and up. More value on the screen. Huge stars being attracted to work in television that a few years ago would never dream of leaving making movies to go onto television. That's all changed. It's very, very exciting, and it's great for the British creative industries who are so good at producing great drama which travels.
Dawn Chmielewski, what about Disney's weighing in? Because that's going to happen pretty soon, and that may shift things again, given what a giant it is.
That's true. Disney has made no secret of its commitment to really be a dominant force in streaming. The company's CEO, Bob Iger, has made plain that this is the singular goal of the company, to begin to capture audiences that have already left traditional television and are looking online for the freedom to choose their viewing options. And so Disney will launch its service here in the U.S. on November 12th. There's some indication that early next year the service will reach the U.K. And it is throwing all of its best brands behind this initiative, all of its franchises, from the Marvel superhero franchises to Lucasfilm and the Star Wars stories to Disney and Pixar animation. It is throwing all of its best-known entertainment brands behind this service, which is very inexpensive. It's being offered at $6 a month, which is half the price that the typical Netflix subscriber pays.
Interesting that you've mentioned finally the money. We're talking about pay TV. Michael Grade, this increased ambition that you talk about, what do you think that's going to do to those traditional broadcasters?
Well, they've been very badly let down. The BBC, Channel 4 and ITV and the others have been very badly let down by the regulators who stopped them going into streaming together a few years ago with a project called Kangaroo, which was brand named Kangaroo. They were stopped by the regulators in one of the most seriously myopic pieces of regulation in the history of regulation in this country, and we've handed the market to the Americans. But it's fine. If you make programmes for British audiences, the British audiences will find them, and there's no doubt that the skills of the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, Channel 5 and so on are in making programmes for British audiences, Downton Abbey, Happy Valley, you name it. We're still very good at doing it, and we can compete with a rich mix of public service broadcasting, which obviously includes news and current affairs.
Michael Grade, Lord Grade, former ITV and BBC chairman, and Dawn Chmielewski, senior media editor at Forbes. Thanks both very much. Now, unless you've been hiding in a cave, you will know that this is happening in Japan.
Konnichiwa. Rugby World Cup, Japan 2019.
Here's Courtney Laws. He's a matter of inches short. England pick and go again, and they score round the fringe. And it's Manu Tuolangi.
Well, rugby fans have just hours to wait for the World Cup final tomorrow. South Africa are playing England in Tokyo. The mood here has obviously reached fever pitch, with England hoping to repeat their 2003 performance. For the Springboks, as the South African team is known, it's a chance to win the title for a third time. They last won back in 2007, prevailing over England then. So what's the mood in South Africa this time? Milton Nkosi's been finding out.
I'm in the major intersection of Senton Drive and William Nicol. I can see a man running across the road selling flags of the South African rugby team, the Springboks.
I'm telling the Springbok about this Japan, the more this jumping spread in Japan, the more I need money, the more I make money.
The more the Springbok jumps in Japan, the more you make money.
Exactly. Yes.
He's also selling the national flag here, which is red, green, white and gold with a bit of black. And beside those flags, I can see gigantic white flag with a red cross in it with the words England. So he's not just selling South African flags, he's selling the English flag as well ahead of the Rugby World Cup game.
Sia.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks, and you?
Very, very well.
President Cyril Ramaphosa is optimistic as he told the Springboks' first black captain Sia Kolisi in this video call just a few days ago.
Strength to you all. Tell the boys that I said strength to you all. We're all behind you, okay?
I'll definitely tell them, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sia. Thank you.
Ready? Go.
I'm just standing in the middle of a field here. The floodlights are on, it's in the evening, but I can see young ladies preparing themselves for a selection to be part of the Women's World Cup in 2021. They say they are inspired by this World Cup in Japan. I just asked their coach here, Chanel Alberts, what inspired her about the Springboks this time around in Japan.
World Cups gives you hope, and hope creates that excitement in the air, and you can feel it in the whole of South Africa. We're more united because we're supporting the same team, and it filters through to these goals, and we're definitely backing Sia and the boys.
And what is your score prediction?
I say the Springboks will win. It will be a close game.
And I asked some of the girls here about their predictions for Saturday's World Cup final in Tokyo.
I think it's going to be a very tight game. I really think we're going to win by 1 point or a conversion or a penalty. So I want to say 15-16 or 15-17, 15-18. They're like a very close score.
South African women rugby players ending that report by Milton Nkosi. Just time for our closing headline. A senior Chinese official has signalled that Beijing might change how it governs Hong Kong following months of pro-democracy protests. It's thought the way the territory's leader is chosen and replaced might be altered. The activist Isaac Cheng told us the protesters wouldn't step back if the Chinese tried to indoctrinate or brainwash future generations against democracy. That's The World Tonight. This is Razia Iqbal. For me and everyone on the programme, have a very good weekend.